My name is Natalie Brooks. I am 32 years old, and at some point without asking me, my family quietly decided that my free time belonged to them. It was not something anyone ever said out loud. There was no meeting. No announcement. It just happened slowly, like furniture being moved inch by inch until one day you realize the room is no longer yours. My sister knew I had been planning my spring break trip for months. She knew because I talked about it constantly. Not in an annoying way, at least I do not think so, but in the careful, hopeful way people talk about something they are afraid might disappear if they do not hold onto it tightly enough. I had asked for the time off early. I had rearranged work shifts, traded weekends, and watched my vacation hours drain down to almost nothing. I booked flights with friends from college and circled the departure date on my calendar like a child counting down to a birthday. It was the first real break I had planned in years. My sister knew all of this. That is why it stunned me when she casually announced, in the middle of dinner at my parents' house, that her babysitter had fallen through and I would be watching her kids instead. She did not ask. She did not look at me when she said it. She simply stated it like a fact that had already been decided, the same way someone says it might rain tomorrow. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. I waited for the rest of the sentence. The part where she would laugh and say she was joking. Or where she would ask if I might be able to help if I changed my plans. But none of that came. She just kept eating. My parents did not look surprised. That was the part that hurt the most. They both turned their heads toward me in perfect sync, wearing the same expectant expressions I had seen my entire adult life. The look that said, "You'll say yes. You always do." It was like my trip did not exist. Like months of planning were just scribbles in pencil, easy to erase. Something in me went very still. This time, I said no. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain myself. I did not list the flights I would lose or the money already spent. I did not beg them to understand. I simply said I was leaving for spring break, and I would not be staying home to babysit. The room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself had paused. My sister's face changed. Her cheeks flushed a deep, angry red I had never seen before. It was not frustration. It was not stress. It was the kind of anger that comes when someone breaks an unspoken rule. The kind that says, "You were never supposed to refuse." My father was the first to speak. His voice hardened instantly, sharp with disappointment. He asked why I was being so selfish. Why I only ever thought about myself. I did not argue. I picked up my bag, thanked my mother for dinner out of habit, and walked out the door before my hands could start shaking in front of them. By the time I reached my car, my heart was pounding so fast I had to sit there for a moment before turning the key. The drive home blurred together, streetlights streaking past while I tried to convince myself I had done nothing wrong. The next morning, they showed up at my apartment with the kids. Before I tell you what happened then, let me take you back a few days earlier, to when my life still felt almost normal. I work near the airport in San Diego. It is the kind of job that quietly eats your energy if you are not careful. Long shifts. Early mornings. Weekends that disappear before you realize they are gone. For years, planning a real vacation felt impossible. There was always something else that needed my attention. Someone else who needed help. The spring break trip started as a joke in a group chat with friends from college. Someone sent a photo of a beach and said, "What if we actually did this?" We laughed, sent memes, and moved on. Except we did not. A few weeks later, we were comparing flight prices. Then we were splitting the cost of an oceanfront rental. Then we were arguing about who would cook which nights and who would bring groceries. Somewhere along the way, it became real. I moved shifts around at work, begged for specific days off, and watched my vacation hours tick down one by one in the company portal. Every confirmation email felt like proof that this time, I was really leaving. My older sister, Rachel Brooks, knew every detail. I told her which airline we booked, how early the flight was, and how I would have to leave my apartment before sunrise to make it to the airport. She listened carefully, asked practical questions about luggage weight and travel insurance, and never once hinted that my plans might be a problem. That should have been my first warning. Rachel had been treating me like her built-in babysitter long before this trip existed. When she first had kids, it started small. She would call and ask if I could stop by for an hour so she could run an errand alone. I always said yes. An hour did not feel like much. Then the hour turned into an afternoon. Then into entire evenings, where I sat on her couch, with cartoons playing in the background, while she stayed out late with her husband. My parents saw me with the kids so often that it quietly became part of the family story. When they talked about Rachel needing a break, my name was always the solution floating in the room. I live alone. I do not have children. I rent a one-bedroom apartment instead of owning a house. So in their minds, my time must cost less. Over the last year, I started pulling back. I stopped saying yes automatically. I let some calls go to voicemail. I told Rachel I could not watch the kids on work nights when I had early shifts the next morning. She did not like the change. Her messages shifted from grateful to impatient. She stopped asking and started sending schedules, as if my calendar existed only to be filled in around hers. There was one evening that should have warned me how far she was willing to push. I was logging in for mandatory online training when she called, already in crisis mode. She said her backup care had fallen through and she was halfway out the door. Before I could even process what she meant, there was a knock at my apartment. 2 small backpacks landed on my doormat. I ran the training on mute while handing out snacks and breaking up arguments over a tablet. Rachel picked the kids up 3 hours later, cheerful and tired, thanking me like she had borrowed a sweater. After that, I tried to be direct. I told her I needed notice. That my job did not allow me to drop everything just because she decided to leave the house. She nodded, said she understood, and within a week texted me, "You're the only one I trust with them." It stopped sounding like a compliment. By the time spring break got close, I guarded that week like it was the last good thing waiting for me. I taped a packing list to my fridge. Set alarms to check in for the flight. Scheduled a ride to the airport before dawn. My co-workers knew I would be gone. My manager approved the time. My friends sent countdown screenshots. My parents only saw the version of things that was easiest for them to understand. When I mentioned being tired, my mother reminded me that Rachel had 2 little kids. My father said I was good with them. Like that settled everything. The last Sunday before my trip, my parents invited everyone over for dinner. I showed up exhausted but determined to keep the night calm. I promised myself I would not bring up the trip unless someone else did. Rachel arrived late with both kids clinging to her legs, dropped a bag of snacks on the counter, and slid right back into the rhythm of the family like nothing had changed. We ate with the television humming in the background. Small talk drifted around the room. Then Rachel leaned back and announced that her sitter had cancelled and spring break was going to be a disaster unless someone stepped in. She did not look at me. She did not need to. The silence that followed was familiar. I told them I was still going on my trip. That was the moment everything broke. The moment I said I was still going on my trip, the air in the room changed. It was subtle at first, like a shift in pressure before a storm. My sister, Rachel Brooks, finally turned her head toward me. Her expression tightened in a way that made my stomach knot, as if she were trying to decide whether I was joking or deliberately provoking her. She started listing reasons. School was closed for spring break. Her husband was on call at work. Childcare was expensive. Reliable sitters were impossible to find on short notice. Every sentence landed heavier than the last, stacking up like evidence in a case where the verdict had already been decided without me present. She said she thought family was supposed to show up when it mattered. That was when my dad put his plate down on the coffee table with a firm clink. He looked at me the way he used to when I was a teenager, who had broken curfew, like I had crossed a line I did not even know existed. He told me I was being selfish. He said I was thinking about a vacation instead of the real responsibilities happening here at home. He did not ask why I looked so tired. He did not ask how long it had been since I had taken time for myself. He did not ask if I needed help. All he wanted was for me to cancel. My mom tried to soften things, the way she always does when tension starts to show. She said everyone was stressed. That we could figure something out if I was flexible. The word flexible landed in my chest like a stone. In my family, flexibility has always meant that I bend so no one else has to. I put my fork down slowly and folded my hands in my lap so no one would see them shaking. I told them, as evenly as I could, that I was not canceling anything and that my answer was not going to change. I added that I loved the kids. That I was happy to see them at birthdays and holidays. But my life could not revolve around emergency babysitting anymore. No one spoke. The television kept playing in the background, some laugh track rising and falling at all the wrong moments. Rachel stared at me like I had become a stranger sitting across from her. My dad opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, then closed it when I did not look away. I gathered my things without rushing. I thanked my mom for dinner. I hugged one of the kids when he ran over. Then I walked out with my keys already in my hand, before anyone could stop me. The drive home felt longer than usual. My heart raced so hard it made my hands shake on the steering wheel. I kept replaying the moment I said no, half expecting to realize I had imagined it. But I had not. Back in my apartment, the quiet felt heavier than the argument. I dropped my keys into the small ceramic dish by the door, and stood there for a moment, listening to the distant hum of traffic heading toward the airport. Somewhere past the buildings, runway lights blinked on and off. Each one felt like a reminder that there was still a way out of all this. I told myself the hard part was over. My phone disagreed. The screen lit up almost immediately, buzzing in short, impatient bursts. The first message was from Rachel. A solid block of text that filled the screen. She wrote about closed schools, about her husband's shifts, about how exhausted she was and how no one understood what her days looked like. The message went on and on until the words blurred together. Somewhere in the middle, she wrote that she could not believe I would choose a trip over real responsibility. That she did not recognize me anymore. There was nothing about the years I had rearranged around her life. Nothing about the weekends I had given up. Nothing about the times I had dropped everything without complaint. I read it twice, then placed my phone face down on the counter like it might burn a hole through it if I stared too long. Any reply I sent right then would either sound like an apology or an attack. I was tired of living between those two options. Instead, I filled the kettle, waited for the water to boil, and sat at my small kitchen table with a mug of tea. The packing list was still taped to the fridge: passport, charger, headphones, toiletries. Seeing my own priorities written in my handwriting grounded me in a way no conversation ever had. When I finally picked my phone back up, the family group chat had exploded. My mom had written about everyone being stressed and needing to meet in the middle. My dad said we needed to be realistic and think about what was best for the kids. In his mind, being realistic usually meant that I was the one who gave something up. Rachel dropped a photo of the school calendar into the chat, circles drawn around the days off like visual proof that I was being unreasonable. I did not reply there. I opened a new message to Rachel instead. I typed that I would be out of town for spring break on the dates I had already given her. That I would not be providing childcare that week. That she needed to find another solution. The words looked stiff, almost like they belonged in a work email. I reread them several times, trimming anything that sounded like an opening she could push through later. Then I hit send. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then nothing. A few minutes later, Rachel posted again, not to me, but back in the family group chat. She wrote a long explanation about how she had tried everything. About how some people were refusing to help. About how hard it was to be a mother when others would not step up. She never used my name. She did not have to. A few relatives reacted with small emojis, the digital version of nodding along from the sidelines. I turned on Do Not Disturb and shut off the main light, letting the glow from outside stretch across the floor. The apartment felt calmer when I focused on small, physical tasks instead of the mess of emotions waiting on my phone. I pulled my suitcase out of the closet and laid it open on the bed. I folded clothes into neat, deliberate stacks. Each shirt felt like a small promise to myself that I was still going. Later, when the airline app allowed it, I checked in for my flight immediately. Watching my name and seat number appear on the screen felt like a door clicking shut. Sleep did not come easily. I lay on top of the covers, listening to distant engines as planes climbed into the sky, replaying the dinner in my head despite my best efforts not to. The group chat stayed quiet, a blank grey bubble I refused to open again. The next day at work, concentration felt like something I had to earn. My phone lit up every few minutes until I finally turned it face down and buried it under a stack of folders. By lunchtime, curiosity won. When I unlocked the screen, there was a new image from Rachel waiting at the top of our thread. It was a photo of a handwritten schedule. The entire week of spring break was mapped out in neat, confident handwriting. My name was written in the margins of each day, penciled in from morning until evening. Underneath were notes about drop-off times, bedtime routines, favorite snacks. There was not a single question mark anywhere on the page. Something cold settled in my chest. I closed the picture and muted the conversation. That was when a thought I had been avoiding finally surfaced. What if she did not take no for an answer? The idea sat with me the rest of the afternoon, growing heavier by the hour. By the time I got home, it was no longer abstract. It felt like a plan she was already preparing to execute. I opened the tenant portal for my building and scrolled through the community rules with more focus than I had managed all day. Buried between notes about parking permits and trash pickup were lines about unattended minors and resident responsibilities. For the first time, I allowed myself to think calmly about what I would do if Rachel showed up at my door and tried to hand me the problem anyway. The morning I had been bracing for arrived sooner than I expected. I woke before my alarm, the faint roar of planes rising and fading outside. The hallway beyond my door was still, but my body felt like it was already running. On the entry table, beside my suitcase, lay a folded note I had written the night before. And for the first time, I was not wondering whether I was being too harsh. I was wondering whether I had waited too long. I woke up before my alarm, the low roar of planes rising and fading outside my window. The sound usually blended into the background of my life, but that morning it felt like a countdown. My apartment was still dark. The hallway beyond my door was quiet. Too quiet. I sat up in bed and listened, holding my breath, as if that might help me hear something coming. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the hum of the building waking up slowly around me. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, my body would not relax. I pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt and walked to the front door. The deadbolt was locked, solid beneath my hand. On the small entry table beside my suitcase lay the folded note I had written the night before. I had gone down to the leasing office after work, nerves tucked behind neutral questions. The leasing manager was already gone, but a staff member named Olivia Grant was still at her desk, sipping coffee and finishing paperwork. I asked her what tenants were supposed to do if someone tried to leave children unattended in the hallway outside an apartment. She did not blink. Her answer was calm and direct. Residents were not required to accept children they had not agreed to watch. Minors were not supposed to be left unattended in common areas. If it happened, the building expected residents to call for help, not absorb the situation quietly. Hearing that out loud did something to me. For years, my family had treated my reluctance as a flaw. Olivia framed it as policy. As safety. As something normal. Back upstairs, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote the note. I kept it short and plain. I said I would not be providing childcare during spring break. I wrote that leaving children outside my apartment while walking away would be treated as abandonment, and that I would contact building management and request a welfare check if necessary. There were no explanations. No apologies. Just boundaries and consequences. That note was still there now, waiting. A sound pulled me back to the present. The elevator. It stopped on my floor with a soft mechanical thud. My heart jumped. Footsteps followed. Small ones. Then heavier ones behind them. The unmistakable drag of bags across carpet. They stopped directly outside my door. Knuckles hit the wood in a pattern I knew too well. I did not move. The knock came again, harder this time. Then I heard something being set down near the threshold. Through the peephole, I saw two backpacks lined up neatly against my door. Just above them, the tops of two small heads. My sister, Rachel Brooks, stood over them, jaw tight. Her husband hovered beside her with one hand on a rolling suitcase. I felt my pulse spike, then settle into something steadier. This was it. I bent down, slid the envelope under the door, and watched the edge of white paper disappear toward their shoes. Rachel picked it up almost immediately. Her eyes moved across the page. Confusion crossed her face first, then disbelief. Her shoulders tightened. Her husband leaned in to read over her shoulder, his mouth pressing into a thin line. Their voices rose quickly. I could not hear every word, but fragments cut through the door. Accusations about family. About loyalty. About turning something private into something official. The kids shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the adults and my silent door. I kept my hands at my sides and focused on my breathing. This was the moment every past yes had trained them to expect a different outcome. The pressure in their voices did not move me. After a few long minutes, the tone changed. Zippers rasped. Fabric scraped against the floor. The backpacks were lifted instead of left behind. Footsteps moved away toward the elevator. There was one last burst of raised voices. Then the doors slid shut. The hallway fell quiet. I waited. When I finally opened the door, the corridor was empty. The envelope lay just inside my threshold, pushed back under in a crumpled crease. I smoothed it out, folded it again, and placed it in the front pocket of my backpack beside my boarding pass. It no longer felt like a threat. It felt like proof. The first thing I did was lock the deadbolt again. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It felt more like the tremor that comes after you finally put down something heavy you have been pretending is easy to carry. I took photos. One of the note. One of the empty hallway. No backpacks. No children. No one waiting. Then I went downstairs. Olivia was back at the leasing office, flipping through maintenance forms. I waited until she finished a call and told her that the situation we had talked about had almost happened. I kept my voice level as I described the backpacks, the kids, and the argument through the door. I showed her the photos. She listened without interrupting. Then she pulled up the security camera feed for my floor. I watched her scroll through the footage, her expression shifting slightly as she nodded. She printed a copy of the building policy, highlighted the relevant sections, and told me she would file an incident report. Before I left, she asked if I expected my family to return while I was out of town. I told her I hoped not. She wrote down my travel dates and said staff would respond if anyone tried again. Procedure. That word settled my nerves more than any apology ever could. Back upstairs, my phone was full of messages. Rachel alternated between calling me cold and claiming she had never planned to leave the kids. My dad said involving the building went too far. My mom said family issues should stay inside the family. I sent one final message. I wrote that I would not be discussing childcare any further. That my plans were clear in writing. That anyone who came to my door expecting me to take the kids would be turned away. Then I muted the thread. The rest of the week passed in uneven jumps. Work happened. Packing continued. My mind kept replaying the image of those backpacks lined up against my door. 2 days before my flight, an email from the leasing office appeared in my inbox. It summarized the incident, referenced the footage, and confirmed I had never agreed to provide childcare. I saved it. The night before I left, I zipped my suitcase closed and set my alarm before sunrise. My phone lit up one last time with a new message from Rachel. I did not open it. Morning came early. I checked the deadbolt out of habit. Grabbed my backpack. The boarding pass, the printed email, and the folded note sat together in the front pocket. Outside, another plane passed low overhead. This time, it sounded like permission. The ride to the airport felt surreal. The city streets blurred under the early morning light, the hum of the engine beneath me steady and predictable. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that I felt like I was moving purely for myself. No one else's expectations, no one else's plans, no one else's crises to solve. Rachel's texts had stopped, but their echo lingered. I could imagine the screen lighting up over and over in my apartment, my name written in bold, my obligations assumed. But here, in the car, there was only me and the road. My driver made small talk about early flights and long security lines, but I barely registered it. I was too busy noticing the difference between running to someone else's schedule and moving on my own. At the airport, I checked in. The sight of my name and seat number on the screen gave me a small, quiet thrill. A reminder that I had done this for me. My backpack felt heavier than usual, not because of what I packed, but because it carried the weight of every boundary I had drawn over the past week. Walking past the TSA line, past travelers hustling to catch flights, I felt a strange sense of detachment from my old life. The arguments, the guilt trips, the last-minute demands, they all felt distant, almost unreal. The plane lifted off. San Diego shrank below me, a patchwork of streets, cars, and houses. My apartment, my hallway, my front door, all the pressure I had felt, the backpacks, the notes, the emails, the endless texts, everything stayed behind, smaller than I had imagined. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without wondering if someone was about to push their life into mine. The week in front of me stretched open like a blank page. Spring break was no longer a hypothetical, it was real. And for the first time, I was allowed to live it. My friends greeted me at the rental house, their faces bright with excitement and relief. We had been planning this for months, and now the anticipation became reality. Price alerts, booking confirmations, and group chat arguments about who would cook dinner each night, all of it faded as we arrived. The rental house overlooked the ocean. Waves rolled in rhythmically, washing away the last residue of my anxiety. I unpacked methodically, placing each item carefully, as if each fold of clothing could seal the boundary I had set. Evenings passed in laughter, late-night walks on the sand, and conversations that didn't include schedules or obligations. For once, my time was mine, and it felt sacred. Meanwhile, back home, I knew the situation was not over. I had already seen how persistent Rachel could be. But for the first time, her persistence didn't have a hold over me. I kept my phone in a drawer for the first few days, checking only at designated intervals to make sure there were no emergencies, nothing that fell within the scope of my responsibilities. The texts that awaited me, when I finally checked, were long, frustrated messages, but I read them calmly. No anger. No guilt. I simply reminded myself, I had communicated my boundaries clearly. A particularly long string from Rachel detailed every last-minute emergency she could manufacture. Closed schools, a sick neighbor, her husband's overtime, all written with the implied expectation that I would drop everything. I stared at my screen for a long time. Then, I archived the messages. Not deleted. Not ignored. Archived. Out of sight, out of immediate mind. I began noticing something I hadn't before, the absence of constant interruptions, the freedom to make choices without justification, the way time expanded when no one else was dictating it. Every morning, the sun rose over the ocean, and I realized I was not racing against anyone's needs but my own. By the third day, a subtle change started in me. It wasn't dramatic, no revelation in the middle of the night, but steady. I laughed more freely. I spoke more openly about what I wanted. I even indulged in small, selfish pleasures, a lazy morning on the balcony, a book read in one sitting, an unhurried walk on the beach. I began to notice how much my life had been consumed by others' expectations. How many weekends I had spent shuffling to accommodate Rachel, her kids, her husband's schedule, my parents' assumptions. All of it felt like a weight I had never realized I carried. And now, free of that weight, I could finally breathe. The days passed with surprising speed. Sunrises became my alarm, coffee my ritual, the ocean my constant companion. Each moment felt deliberately mine, untethered from the shits that had dominated my life for years. Late one afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Another long string from Rachel, this time with my mom forwarding messages about family obligations and responsibilities. But I did not panic. I did not rush to respond. Instead, I read the messages while standing on the balcony, letting the salty wind clear my head. I reminded myself of Olivia Grant's words from the leasing office. I am not responsible for someone else's children unless I choose to be. Boundaries are not selfish, they are necessary. And for the first time, I truly believed it. That evening, sitting with my friends, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized something profound. I had spent so many years measuring my worth by how much I gave to others. Now, the measure was different. Now, my worth was in how I honored my own life, my own time, my own choices. It was a quiet victory, but it felt monumental. The week continued with more adventures, laughter, and even moments of stillness I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy in years. And through it all, I realized that my family's reactions, Rachel's anger, my parents' disapproval, no longer dictated my emotions. They existed, but they did not consume me. Each night before bed, I would check my phone briefly. Messages had slowed. Rachel seemed to realize, at least for now, that I would not be drawn back into their narrative. And even if she tried, I now had the precedent, the boundaries, and the confidence to stand my ground. On the final day of my trip, I sat on the balcony alone, staring out at the horizon. The week had been everything I needed it to be, not because of the destinations or the activities, but because it had been mine. My time, my choices, my boundaries had been respected, and that was the gift I had been denied for so long. When I returned home, the world felt different. The apartment was the same, but I was not. I unlocked the door, walked inside, and felt a sense of ownership I had not known before. My peace, my space, my life, all of it felt restored. The messages from Rachel and my parents were still there, but I no longer felt the same obligation to respond immediately. I had established my limits, and for the first time, they were not negotiable. Over the following weeks, the dynamic began to shift. My parents started planning visits with the kids on their own terms, without assuming I would automatically step in. Rachel, frustrated but unable to manipulate me, began venting elsewhere, mostly to people I did not have to interact with. The tension in family interactions diminished, not because the conflict disappeared, but because my boundaries became real, concrete, and enforceable. For the first time, I realized that choosing myself was not an act of selfishness, it was an act of survival, an act of self-respect. And it was a lesson I intended to keep teaching, both to myself and to the people around me. Returning home, after spring break, should have felt like sliding back into my old routine, but it didn't. The apartment smelled the same, the streets outside were familiar, and the building hummed with its usual morning rhythm. Yet, something fundamental had changed. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. It wasn't just relief that the kids hadn't been left at my door while I was gone. It was something deeper, ownership. My choices, my boundaries, my time, finally respected. The week away had been a revelation. The sunrises over the ocean, the unhurried mornings, the laughter of friends untainted by family obligations, they had shown me that life could exist on my terms. I returned not just rested, but transformed. No one had contacted me during the trip about the kids. My phone had remained mostly silent, except for the occasional group chat ping that I ignored. And now, home again, the quiet was almost foreign. But the calm would not last. The first knock came mid-morning. It was soft at first, almost tentative. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My heart raced. I knew who it would be before even looking through the peephole. Rachel. And she wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and opened the door. Her face was tight, a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Her husband followed behind her, eyes scanning my apartment, as though I had violated some unspoken rule. The kids clung to her legs, backpacks in hand, ready for a battle they didn't understand. "You can't just ignore us," Rachel said, her voice shaking with anger. "You can't treat your family like this." "I treated my family exactly the way I needed to," I said calmly. "I communicated clearly before I left. My boundaries were set. I'm not responsible for child care unless I choose to be." She flinched at the word boundaries like it was an accusation. "You think you're the only one who matters. You think your plans are more important than anyone else's." "No," I said. "I think my life and time matter as much as yours. And I will not let my choices be dictated by your emergencies." Her husband, standing stiffly behind her, interjected. "You're being unreasonable. The kids, they do not need me," I interrupted. "They need you, their parents. I am not their default caretaker. That role is yours." Rachel's eyes narrowed, and for a second, I saw the rage that had always simmered under her surface. The kind of rage that tries to enforce rules no one else agreed to. "You've changed," she spat. "You used to help. You used to say yes." "I did," I admitted. "But saying yes against my will taught everyone that my time is free, that my life is not my own. I'm done with that. I've set my boundaries, and they are non-negotiable." She stepped closer, lowering her voice, but not her intensity. "You think you're better than us now? You think you can just walk away from everything?" "I'm not better than anyone," I said steadily. "I'm just prioritizing my own life for the first time. And yes, I will walk away from anything that infringes on my boundaries." Her husband shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsettled by my resolve. He opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing there was no arguing with someone who had finally drawn a line. The kids shifted behind her, sensing the tension. One of them tugged at her sleeve. Rachel looked down briefly, then back at me, eyes blazing. "You don't understand," she hissed. "This is family. Family helps each other." "This is family," I said, my voice firm but calm. "But family does not mean sacrificing my life, my mental health, or my boundaries. I love your kids, but love does not require me to become your emergency plan. Not anymore." There was a long pause. The air between us felt charged, heavy with years of unspoken rules, unacknowledged sacrifices, and resentments I had carried silently. Finally, Rachel's voice dropped, quieter but still sharp. "You're going to regret this. You think we'll just let it go." "I don't care if you regret it," I said. "What matters is that I respect myself. And from now on, my answer is yes only when I choose it. Not because it's expected, not because it's convenient for someone else." Her husband stepped forward, voice calmer, almost conciliatory. "Look, we've always relied on you. We didn't think, you relied on me because I let you," I said. "I'm not available like that anymore. You need to figure out your own solutions. I'm done being the default." Rachel's eyes filled with fury, frustration, and perhaps a flicker of disbelief. She looked like someone who had never been told no before. And now, she was seeing the consequences. For the first time, I realized the magnitude of what I had done. This was more than a refusal. It was a declaration. I had stopped being the family's convenient solution. I had stopped being the person who sacrificed everything for everyone else. And that realization, that quiet surge of empowerment, made my chest swell. Rachel finally stepped back, her jaw tight. Her husband's expression had shifted from irritation to cautious understanding. The kids looked confused, unsure why their world had suddenly changed. I closed the door gently, my hand steady, my heart still racing but no longer from fear. I had won something far more important than an argument. I had won my own life. Over the next few days, I noticed a subtle but profound shift. My parents reached out to ask about my trip, but they no longer assumed I would automatically step in for Rachel. Rachel herself tried to push boundaries a few times via texts, but I responded firmly, always reiterating my limits. Each response felt easier than the last. Each time reinforced the line I had drawn. I realized that change doesn't happen overnight. Boundaries are not respected immediately. But when they are clear, consistent, and enforced, they have power. And the best part? I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel selfish. I felt alive, unburdened, and finally free to prioritize myself. For years, I had measured my worth by how much I gave to others, how much I sacrificed for family, how convenient I could be. Now, my worth was measured by how well I respected my own life, time, and choices. Rachel and I might never fully agree on what family means. But I know this: I will no longer let anyone use my love, my time, or my energy as a tool to control me. I am still part of my family, but I am no longer their default. And that, more than anything, feels like victory. Returning to my normal routine after the confrontation was both liberating and strange. The silence of my apartment felt different now. No knocking at odd hours, no unexpected demands, no last-minute texts begging for help with schedules I hadn't agreed to. It was quiet, and yet full, a space finally belonging to me. For the first few days, I moved through my apartment slowly, noticing the difference. My plants didn't need watering according to anyone else's schedule. My coffee ritual didn't need to be interrupted. I could leave the windows open without worrying that someone would knock to hand me another emergency. For once, I was accountable only to myself. Work, which had always felt like a relentless treadmill, felt different. The tasks I had been pushing off, or completing in a state of stress, now existed on their own terms. I responded to emails deliberately, attended meetings with focus, and realized how much mental space I had reclaimed. My colleagues noticed a subtle change too: my energy was calmer, more deliberate, and even my manager commented on how composed I seemed. The first text from Rachel after my return was polite, but laced with frustration. She tried the old tactics: passive-aggressive remarks about family responsibilities, and subtle guilt trips. I read the message, let it sit for a few minutes, then typed a simple, firm reply: I understand your concerns. My schedule is my responsibility, not yours. I cannot help this week. Please make other arrangements. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no invitation for negotiation. It felt strange at first, not giving in, but the sensation quickly turned into relief. A relief I hadn't realized I'd been craving for years. Over the following weeks, I noticed more subtle shifts in our family dynamic. My parents seemed to finally recognize that my time was my own. They began planning family visits without assuming I would automatically help with Rachel's children. For the first time, our group chats included messages about everyone's schedules, not just my obligations. Rachel, for her part, was clearly frustrated. But without access to my compliance, her attempts at manipulation lost power. She began venting elsewhere, mostly to friends who weren't bound to me by shared history or responsibility. When she tried to test the boundaries again, I repeated the same firm stance, and gradually, the intensity of her attempts diminished. I began to understand that boundaries are not a one-time fix. They need to be maintained, reinforced, and sometimes defended. Every text ignored, every polite, but firm refusal, every delayed response became a reinforcement of the norm I had chosen. I wasn't just setting limits, I was creating a precedent. The changes weren't just external. Inside, I felt a transformation I hadn't anticipated. I slept deeper, worked with more focus, and began rediscovering interests that had been sidelined for years. Long walks, weekend hobbies, even simple things like reading a book without guilt, it was all part of reclaiming a life I hadn't realized I'd been missing. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker below. I thought back to the spring break trip, the ocean, the friends, the freedom, and realized that the real change had started long before the flight. It had started the moment I said no to Rachel at my parents' dinner. That was the spark. Everything else, the plane ride, the rental house, the unburdened mornings, was the result of that first decisive act. I also began noticing changes in my relationship with my parents. My mother, who had always assumed my compliance, started to ask before making requests. She checked if I had the time or energy, rather than assuming I would drop everything. My father, once quick to criticize me for asserting boundaries, began to temper his reactions. The lines I drew weren't just protecting me, they were subtly teaching my family how to respect limits. At work, I noticed the benefits as well. My mental space was clearer, my energy more consistent. I could complete tasks without the lingering weight of guilt for being too busy for family demands. I could focus on my professional growth without constant interruptions from personal crises. And surprisingly, I started enjoying work more than I had in years. I began making plans for future trips, hobbies, and experiences without the fear that someone would assume I was available at a moment's notice. I realized that life had been passing me by, measured by how much I sacrificed for others. Now, I was living according to my priorities. Rachel tried to test boundaries occasionally, sending long strings of texts about her kids, her husband's schedule, and family emergencies. Each time, I responded calmly, consistently, and firmly. Over time, her attempts became less frequent. I began to understand a truth that had taken years to fully grasp: when you respect your own life, others adjust. They either adapt, or they reveal who they truly are. I also noticed a shift in my own emotional landscape. Where I had once felt guilt for saying no, I now felt empowerment. Where I had felt anxiety at the thought of disappointing someone, I felt clarity. And where I had once measured my worth by others' dependence on me, I now measured it by my respect for myself. The first birthday after spring break was a turning point. Rachel tried, as she often did, to insert last-minute demands for babysitting. I reminded her politely that I had other commitments, then shifted the focus to a family celebration that included my terms. It was the first time in years that I attended a family gathering without sacrificing my needs or being preoccupied with someone else's agenda. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments when old patterns tempted me to say yes. But each time I paused and remembered the trip, the ocean, the friends, the freedom, I felt my resolve strengthen. I had seen what life could be when I prioritized myself, and I refused to give that up. Over the months, the dynamic stabilized. Rachel began planning ahead, asking for help instead of assuming it. My parents checked in with me before making plans, respecting the boundaries I had clearly established. I still loved my family, but love no longer required me to be a default solution for every crisis. I also began to see the long-term impact of these changes. My own mental health improved, my professional life became more manageable, and my social connections flourished. I had reclaimed time for friendships, for hobbies, for rest, things I had long neglected. For the first time, I understood that boundaries are not just protective, they are generative. They create space for growth, for joy, for autonomy. They allow relationships to function without resentment, without guilt, without manipulation. And most importantly, they allow a person to live fully in their own life, without constantly giving it away. I started journaling again, noting each instance when I had successfully enforced a boundary, each time someone respected my limits. It became a record of empowerment, a reminder that I was capable of living life on my own terms. And slowly, I began to feel lighter. Lighter because I was no longer carrying the weight of others' expectations. Lighter because I was no longer apologizing for existing. Lighter because I had finally chosen myself, and it wasn't selfish, it was essential. I began to dream again. Small dreams at first, a weekend getaway, a new project at work, a creative pursuit. But the dreams grew bolder, as I realized that my life was mine to shape. I could plan, pursue, and enjoy without the constant interference of assumed obligations. The lessons of that spring break, and the confrontation that followed, resonated deeply. I had learned that saying no does not mean saying you don't care. It means saying you care enough to protect yourself. It means choosing your own path, while still loving others responsibly. In the months that followed, I noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible change in Rachel as well. She still pushed occasionally, still tried to negotiate, but with every firm refusal, the pattern weakened. Boundaries, once enforced, have a way of teaching even the most persistent people that some lines are non-negotiable. By the end of the year, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. Family visits were balanced, work remained fulfilling, and my personal life thrived. I had learned a profound truth: life does not demand that you sacrifice yourself for others, and love does not require that you abandon your own needs. I had learned that boundaries are not walls, they are the framework for a healthy, autonomous life. And once established, they transform not just your own world, but the way others interact with you. For the first time in my adult life, I felt fully in control of my time, my energy, and my choices. I could live without the constant shadow of guilt. I could love without losing myself. I could say yes when I wanted to and no when I needed to, and each choice carried the weight of intention, not obligation. And that, more than anything else, was freedom. The weeks following the confrontation had given me something I didn't know I'd been craving: consistency. Not consistency in routine, not in obligations, but in the way I treated myself. The boundaries I had set weren't just rules on paper, they were a reflection of self-respect, a framework for living intentionally. I noticed it first in the little things. I no longer checked my phone at the slightest ping. I no longer rearranged my schedule on a whim to accommodate someone else's emergency. I could plan meals, workouts, or quiet evenings without the creeping anxiety that someone would suddenly demand my time. My apartment, once a space of interrupted peace, had become a sanctuary. Rachel tried a few last attempts, texts dripping with guilt, questions framed as casual check-ins, subtle hints at family expectations. But each time, I responded the same way, calmly, firmly, and without apology. The magic wasn't in anger or confrontation, it was in repetition. Boundaries, I learned, only work when they are consistent. Every time I held firm, the line became stronger, and the attempts to cross it weakened. My parents adjusted too. They no longer assumed I would fill in for Rachel automatically. Instead, they began asking, truly asking, about my availability. They respected my answers, even when it meant making other arrangements. For the first time, I felt seen, not just as a helper, but as an individual whose life had value independent of family needs. Work continued to flourish as well. Without the constant emotional drain of last-minute family crises, I was sharper, more focused, and more creative. Projects that had once felt impossible now fit neatly into my schedule. Meetings became opportunities for contribution rather than a battlefield of multitasking guilt. My boss even commented on the improvement, noting that my productivity and engagement were higher than ever. Friends noticed it too. I started saying yes to invitations that I truly wanted to attend, not just ones I felt obligated to accept. I rediscovered hobbies, spent evenings laughing without worry, and traveled without fear of an unexpected call that would pull me back into someone else's drama. Life, for the first time in years, felt expansive. Rachel's resistance gradually diminished. The initial fury at my refusal had been intense, almost primal, but without my compliance, her strategies lost effectiveness. She adjusted, sometimes reluctantly, but inevitably. It was fascinating and satisfying to witness. She learned the lesson I had learned: you cannot demand someone else's life without consequence. The relationship with my parents stabilized in a healthier way. Our conversations now included mutual respect for schedules, responsibilities, and personal time. There was still tension occasionally, a fleeting reminder of old patterns, but nothing like the relentless pressure I had endured for years. Reflection became a daily practice. I journaled about my choices, my limits, and the emotional shifts I experienced. I noticed how much resentment had accumulated when I constantly said yes out of obligation. I saw the subtle erosion of joy that comes from living for others instead of yourself. Writing it down made it tangible, and seeing the pattern helped me maintain my resolve. I also began to understand something fundamental: boundaries are not about keeping people out. They are about keeping yourself in. They are a declaration that your life, your time, and your energy matter. They are the foundation for healthy relationships, not barriers to love. Over time, I noticed a shift in Rachel's approach to me. She no longer assumed my availability. She began to plan ahead, to ask instead of demand, and to respect the limits I had set. It was not instantaneous, and it was not easy for her, but it was real. And I realized that enforcing boundaries does not push people away, it teaches them how to interact with you respectfully. The kids, once a source of constant unplanned responsibility, became a neutral presence in my life. I loved them, but I loved them on my terms. I could participate in celebrations, attend birthdays, or offer help when it aligned with my schedule, but never out of guilt or coercion. And that freedom changed my relationship with them. Love without resentment became possible. I also saw the long-term impact on myself. I slept more soundly, ate better, exercised without compromise, and found time for hobbies and personal growth. Mentally, I felt stronger, more resilient, and more capable of handling challenges without fear of being pulled into someone else's emergency. Travel became a symbol of this new autonomy. Planning trips, setting itineraries, and exploring places without the constant weight of last-minute obligations reminded me that life was mine to enjoy. Each trip reinforced the lessons learned from that pivotal spring break. Saying no is not selfish, it is essential. I started to mentor friends and colleagues who struggled with similar dynamics in their own families. I shared my experiences, not as advice they had to follow, but as a model of what self-respect and boundaries could look like. Many were surprised at the simplicity and power of just saying no consistently and without guilt. Some cried during these conversations, finally feeling seen in their own struggles. Romantic relationships, too, became healthier. By the time I was ready to date seriously again, I no longer allowed patterns of obligation or guilt to dictate my participation. Partners learned to respect my time, my energy, and my boundaries from the start. The foundation of trust and respect was laid before any other expectations. I realized that the spring break confrontation had been a turning point, but the real change happened afterward. It was in every choice I made to uphold my boundaries. It was in every conversation where I stood firm. It was in every moment I chose my life, my happiness, and my sanity over the unspoken expectations of others. I began to feel a profound sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes not from avoidance, not from compromise, but from integrity. The knowledge that I was living according to my values, not someone else's agenda, brought a calm I had never known. Even family gatherings, which had once been sources of stress and anxiety, became manageable. I could attend, participate, and engage fully because I wasn't carrying the burden of unrequested responsibilities. I could enjoy my family without losing myself in the process. Looking back, I understood the full weight of what had been demanded of me over the years. I had been expected to sacrifice my time, my energy, and my autonomy constantly. And though love had been present, it had been conditional, dependent on my compliance. The lesson was clear: love that requires you to lose yourself is not healthy love. Now, my relationships were rooted in choice, not obligation. I could give freely because it was genuine, not coerced. I could love fully because I was whole, not depleted. I could participate in family life because it was enjoyable, not because it was demanded. I often reflect on that pivotal dinner, when I first said no. It had felt terrifying in the moment, like walking off a cliff without knowing if the net would appear. But the net did appear. Not because others gave it to me, but because I had built it by asserting myself, by respecting my own life, and by refusing to be anyone's default. Freedom, I realized, is not granted. It is claimed. And once claimed, it changes everything. I still see Rachel and her family, still attend events, still celebrate milestones, but always on my terms. No longer a passive participant in the lives of others, I am fully active in my own. And that perspective has transformed how I view relationships, obligations, and self-worth. In the quiet moments, I sometimes marvel at how much I had given away without realizing it. Time, energy, freedom, all spent fulfilling roles that were not mine to fill. And yet, I do not regret the past entirely. Those experiences taught me the value of autonomy, the necessity of boundaries, and the courage it takes to reclaim your life. I've come to understand that life will always present demands, some reasonable, some manipulative, some unexpected. The key is not to avoid responsibility altogether, but to choose carefully which responsibilities serve your values and which undermine your well-being. I look forward to the future differently now. Not with anxiety or guilt, but with confidence. Confident in my decisions, confident in my ability to maintain boundaries, and confident in the knowledge that prioritizing myself is neither selfish nor wrong. The spring break trip, the confrontation, and the months that followed were more than just a story of saying no, they were a lesson in self-respect, personal growth, and empowerment. Today, my life is quieter in some ways, fuller in others, and entirely my own. I wake up with intention, plan my days deliberately, and participate in relationships from a place of choice, not compulsion. I have discovered that peace is not something granted by others, it is something cultivated within. And so, I live each day with clarity, with boundaries intact, and with the freedom to choose my own path. I am no longer the default caretaker, the silent responder, or the one who sacrifices endlessly. I am myself, complete, autonomous, and empowered. My story is not unique, but my claim to autonomy is. And it is mine to protect, nurture, and celebrate every single day.